Hi friends! Today I will be showing you how to make an adjustable 1860s day dress. The great thing about this is you don't have to go out and buy a new pattern to make a dress like this. It is very easily modified from a pattern that you already own. I first ran into adjustable period clothing when I started looking into maternity dresses. And while that is what I need adjustable clothing for, I think it also has a lot of really helpful applications. For instance, a living history group that's trying to build up a lending closet to loan out clothing to maybe new people to the hobby who aren't sure they're ready to invest in something like a gown, or visitors or something like that where you're not sure exactly what size the person who's going to wear the garment is going to be. Or even for people who, for whatever reason, their weight fluctuates frequently and they don't necessarily want 10 different dresses in 10 different sizes sitting in their closet for things they won't necessarily be wearing all the time. So whatever the reason, adjustable clothing I think is a really cool and untapped area. So when I started doing research into maternity clothing, I found a lot of really cool extant garments, but I also found a very in-depth and detailed article from Elizabeth Stewart Clark on her website, The Sewing Academy, where she breaks down using historical methods how to make an adjustable maternity dress. So that method that she shows there is largely the method I will be following. On her website, she shows a more fitted top with a gathered waist, and that's very lovely, but I already have a dress like that, and I do not have a yoked bodice dress, and I think they are so pretty. So that is what I will be modifying my dress into. However, if you are a visual learner and just need a little extra boost, a lot of the methods for making my yoked dress are going to be the same as making the one she outlines in her article, so this video may still help you out. Before we get started, I really just want to reiterate how great of a resource Liz Clark is. Her website has so much in-depth, detailed knowledge that's been researched over a long period of time. Great patterns, very helpful articles. So if you are new to the hobby or haven't heard of her yet, I highly recommend checking out her work and the Sewing Academy. So let's get started. I am so excited to be starting this project today. I've been looking forward to it for a while and finally carved out some time for it. This is the pattern I'm going to use as my base. I bought it secondhand from Facebook. This is the fabric I'm going to use. Let me see if I can get it to color correct. Yeah, that's closer to what it looks like, this warm brown. And I bought this on Facebook in a D-stash group, and it's one of the few fabrics I have actually paid full price for instead of like thrifting or getting at a estate sale or something like that. So this is one of the few fabrics that I have actually purchased from a seller. I'm just gonna put this here to get it to color correct. There we go. This is a sheet that I have been using for linings and mock-ups, and there's not much left, but I think there's enough to use for the linings, so that's cool. And then I went ahead and pulled the relevant pattern pieces. This is the front, back side, and center back pieces that I had fit to myself last time I made this pattern. So they are the pattern pieces, just with a few small changes, and you can check out the video where I made my last 1860s dress if you want to see how I changed them from the pattern. I'll link that in the description. And then I also pulled out the sleeve pattern. I couldn't remember which size I cut out of this pattern, if I did 16 or 20, so I'm gonna kind of have to wing that. So I have the undersleeve and the upper sleeve of both of those sizes that I pulled out. And I'm going to be making a coat sleeve this time. Last time I made this pattern, I improvised my own gathered sleeve, and so I've never actually used the coat sleeve that comes with the pattern, so I thought that would be fun to try and use today. And I'm going to make it out of my lining fabric first as kind of a mock-up to see if that'll be what I want it. So let's get started. So this will be a bit easier if you have a dress already made out of the pattern you're using, because then you can try it on like this to figure out where you want your yoke to be. But if you don't have a dress already, you can kind of improvise by holding the pattern piece up to your body and marking it there, And it is flat lined, so you can use your lining as kind of a mock-up to see if it's how you want it to be or not before you cut your nice fabric. So the back fits fine and we will leave as is, but obviously the waist needs quite a bit of an adjustment. And I do not have a maternity corset, so I don't have quite the right silhouette here. I may try to figure out a padding situation to fix that, but that all depends on time, so that may be something I deal with later. But what I'm gonna do now is go ahead and kind of mark where I want my yoke to be with some pins. And then when I take it off, I will just mark a line on my pattern on my front piece where that is, and then cut it out, and we'll go from there. Looking at extents, I have seen yokes that sit both a little higher and a little lower on the chest, so I think it's down to personal choice. These are my two tentative outlines for where my yoke will end, and I just need to decide which one I like better. So I decided to mark the longer one because I can always cut it down later and I can't always add length on. So I will cut this all out and then we'll do a try on. Here's my lining. I just pinned it together of the sleeve and it fits fine except for the fact that it is a little too short, but I think I can compensate for that and not have to cut it again as long as I cut the main fabric a little bit longer and then kind of turn it up so it meets not right at the edge of the cuff, and I think I can make it work. So I'm in the middle of cutting out all of my pieces. This part of the sleeve is the last piece I have left to do, and then I'm going to use this area here to make some piping. For piping on 1860s dresses, I like to cut it at 1.25 inches. And I like to do that because that leaves me 1/2 inch seam allowance on either side of my piping, and then 1/4 inch to put the actual cord in itself. Plus, it's also the width of this handy dandy thing I've got here to cut along, so it makes everything nice and easy. Once you have cut your main bodice pieces and the piping pieces, you will cut 2 panels of your skirt length as usual, and these will be the back skirts. Then you're going to go ahead and cut 2 panels of your skirt length as usual, but you are also going to add length for the rest of the bodice piece minus the length of the yoke that you have set aside. So these will end up being longer than the back panels, and these will be your front pieces to be added to the yoke. Don't forget to add seam allowances when you are creating your measurements. Now you're just going to put your back pieces and your front yokes together by flatlining like you would usually do. For the front yoke pieces, if you want to make it even more adjustable, especially in the bust area, you can just leave a little extra seam allowance in some strategic places. So then if your bust changes size too drastically or you need to give it to someone else, you can just do a little bit of alterations instead of making a whole new dress. This is more specific to if you're creating a maternity dress instead of just a multi-size dress, but I have marked where my waistline sits now instead of where it sits normally because it's quite a bit higher. And that will allow me to know how I should grade the curve of my tape on the inside to make the gathers go over my belly in a nice way. So we're going to go ahead and measure how far these are up from the normal waistband. I am in my 3rd trimester, and one is at 1 3/4, which is pretty consistent with the other side, and the other is let's call it 3/4 because this one's a little higher than the other, so we'll go with the higher one. So you are going to take one of your front panels, making sure it is one of your longer front panels and that the pattern is going in the right direction. Then you are going to take your front pattern piece where you marked your yoke, line it up with the edge here. This is curved a little, so I put it over here and under here just a little to make it more even. And then your yoke, this here was our line for where it should end, plus our seam allowance. So then we're gonna add seam allowance this way. So the edge of my fabric is a 1/2 inch up from the mark where I want my yoke to end. And then you're just going to cut along this curve here to continue the arm side because the yoke doesn't have the full thing, and if you just added a straight line here, you would have a very uncomfortable sleeve. So just like that, this is what our new piece looks like, all the way straight across with a little curve out. And you're gonna repeat this on your other front panel, just flipping your pattern piece the opposite direction so that you have the other sleeve curve. So now we are gonna take the wrong side of one of our front panels, plus our pattern piece that we've made our marks on. Go ahead and line those back up, and here was our mark for where our waistline should go. So last time I made this pattern, I did have to cut a bit off the waist, and I just marked where that should be. So then we're just going to copy our mark from where our waistband is starting on the back, right over here. You can use chalk, or I'm using water-soluble marker just because it shows up on this fabric easier. Do always test on a scrap piece of fabric that it will actually come out first. Now on the other side of the panel, I'm just going to be doing the same exact thing where I line my pattern piece up and go ahead and copy my mark over for where my waist should be. I'm using my pregnancy waist here. My mark for my natural waist is way down here, and later on I can just move my tapes if I want to wear it lower. Right under your arm, you don't want a ton of gathers because that's not very slimming, so just kind of make a mark avoiding the underarm area. So we won't start our slope until here. But now we are going to draw a line from here straight across and then gradually sloping upward to this mark here, or an even smaller slope down to a lower mark for a non-maternity body. We're going to concentrate most of the slope towards the front half here because that is how the curve around your waist works. So a very gradual slope here, increasing to the front. This is towards the center front, and I forgot to mention that we won't want gathers in our button placket, so I went ahead and marked that out here. I'm going to use a pre-made bias binding because I'm a little lazy and short on time, but you're going to fold over the edge so that there's not a raw edge here. Line it up along your marks that you made and just running stitch through to create a casing. Don't worry about leaving a raw end here under the arm because we will be encasing that and catching our strings and the casing in the seam. As long as you color match your thread pretty well and don't take too large of stitches through the other side, it's really not that visible from the right side, and whatever is visible is going to be covered up with a belt anyway, so it's not too much to worry about. You're going to do 3 rows of those stitches to create 2 channels, and then you are going to thread through a tape. A wider tape would work better for this, but I used a cotton cording because that's what I had. A tape just will tangle less and be less of a hassle for you in the long run. I highly recommend pressing the big panels before sewing them to the rest of the garment. So I got quite a bit of work done, and I thought I would just give you a little update. I gathered the top of my front panels, put in some piping, and attached them to the yoke. So those guys are there. I also attached some piping to the back of my dress and put it into sections so I can gather and attach the skirts in the back. So the front panels are all put together. The back is halfway put together. I need to do my gathering, and then I can attach the side seams. The back skirts here were my first ever attempt at doing gathers quite like this, and I used a trick that I had picked up from a Morgan Donner video where she used 2 needles at once with 2 separate threads, but just doing them all at the same time, and it made it go so much faster, even though it did take a second to pick up and get the hang of. Then I went ahead and whipped those gathers down one by one onto the back of the bodice. This did not take nearly as much time as I had feared it would, and it's another thing that I used an article from the Sewing Academy to learn how to do. This was my first ever attempt at cartridge pleats or gauging, and they're not perfect, but they came out so good, much better than I was expecting. So I'm really happy about that, and I learned a new skill. So now what I'm going to do, this is my back panel and this is my front panel. So I'm going to just sew down the side seams. Here's my tape. And then I'm just going to sew down the side seams to attach the front and back together. So I just wanted to point out that when I sewed the side seam, I had a little knot in my cording here so that it wouldn't slide back through on accident, but I sewed straight through that cording when I sewed my side seams together so that it is locked in place here and won't come out. We have a thing I can try on. Ta-da! So, you know, I didn't pull it all the way tight, but it is a little more flattering when it is tight, and then the belt will help with that as well. But look at that back! Yay! Ooh, please ignore my very messy sewing room. The next step is to sew the belt, and I am doing this in a way that I have recently learned, where you just sew a little bit of the belt, turn the ends, and then you continue to sew the belts as usual, right sides together, but you pull the end through as you sew, turning it as you go so that you don't have a crazy hard tube to deal with later. It just makes the whole process so much easier, and it is now my new favorite way to do anything with a particularly long or skinny strap or belt. To make a long story short, from here you're just going to finish your dress like usual with adding the sleeves, the closures, and doing up the hem, but you just finish it exactly the way you would finish any other gown. To put your dress on and make it to your size, you're just going to take your cord and pull the fabric along it so that it creates the gathers, fitting it to your waist measurement. And then you're just going to go ahead and repeat the same thing on the other side. Then you're going to just zhuzh your gathers a little bit until they're sitting the way that you want them to. Then you're going to tie your cords together just so that nothing shifts around and everything stays in place. And then you're going to tuck them into the inside of the dress so they won't be seen. This is why tapes are better than cords, because the tapes are less likely to get tangled on themselves. Then you're just going to do up the rest of your dress like normal. I chose to do hook and eyes here with buttons just for aesthetic reasons, so that if I ever do need to alter it in the future, the buttonholes aren't going through my seam allowances and I can let things out. Then you're going to put the belt on over the gathers so that everything looks nice and neat. I chose to hold my belt together with hook and bars, and I did this so that you could make the belt fit each individual wear nice and snugly with only a minimal amount of sewing. I like to turn the closure of the belt to the back so that it just looks nice and smooth in the front. Then a little more zhuzhing and you are all good to go. And of course, I had to make a matching mask. So here she is, all done and ready to be worn. I took her on a nice little trip out to a local historic park just to get some ambiance in there. This dress is so incredibly comfortable, and I'll be able to wear it after I have the baby because I can just adjust the gathers down to my smaller waist size. So I am very, very happy to add this dress to my collection. And I feel like I also leveled up a lot of my sewing skills with this dress, so I am very proud of myself with that. My research on maternity wear for this period said that some women did still continue to wear their hoops through their pregnancy, but I decided against that, and that is also totally historically acceptable. Some women would just wear their petticoats as usual. I am really, really happy with the silhouette that I have gotten from this dress. I love the look of the gathered yoke, and I love how swishy the skirts are with the cartridge pleating in the back. I know some people like a more fitted look, so you could achieve something like that by pleating the front panels to the yoke instead of gathering. Anyway, as you can see, I am very much enjoying my new dress and really feeling myself in it, so I can't wait to wear it to events in the future. I highly recommend looking into the Sewing Academy and Liz Clark's research because it is a great resource. I really hope that you've enjoyed this video and hearing about maternity wear in the Victorian period, and that if you are planning on making your own size adjustable dress, this was in some way helpful to you, because I had such a blast making this dress and I have really enjoyed making this video to share with you. Bye friends!